Warning: these social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Well, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here. It is now the 4th day of November here. Hopefully you guys are doing well, and I got a pretty decent day on the docket here. Pretty chipper for this time of year, but that's to be expected in the old fall time. Clear skies. Looks like it's going to be fairly decent, increasing temps, maybe actually shoot back toward the 50-degree mark here where I'm at. Across the U.S. here today, it looks like we got some storms brewing up across the southeast and some spotty stuff throughout the Midwest. A couple things going on up in the northeast, or northwest rather, and of course down on the waters down down in the Pacific, down around Guatemala, Honduras, and that area. Looks like we got a little tropical storm and that brewing there, but other than that, looks to be a fairly decent day. And of course, we've got quite a bit of stuff on the docket here this morning. We're going to get into the market and what's going on there. A number of things by way of shipping and container ships, truckers, you name it, and a whole smattering of other stuff. So stick around. I'll be right back. Hey everybody, Spectre here. Want to tell you about my Teespring store that I just opened up with a handful of products in that for you guys, the listeners, the audience, those that are in chat on a day in, day out basis. Always appreciate your support, and I figured what the heck, we'll throw some merch out there for you guys. And so obviously with YouTube and Nerd Shenanigans as of late, I'm going to be looking to expand to other platforms, and well, it all comes at a cost, so I figured what the heck. That being said, I got some t-shirts and that out here. You can see those in black, white, and gray. Spectre Does News. Got a water tumbler, 20 ounce there. Got a coffee mug you can get in black or white. And of course, we got the Let's Go Brandon #FJB shirt, which you can also find in black, white, or gray. Right now, you can find that all over at https specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. That's https://specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. Thank you for your support. All right, well, right into it we go. Futures hit fresh all-time highs. Treasuries rise on post-Fed euphoria. U.S. equity futures plowed on to recorder highs overnight, propped up by a slew of stellar earnings reports and as investors shrugged off the Federal Reserve's first steps to begin paring its pandemic-era support, as Powell reiterated that the central bank can be patient on raising interest rates, even if rate hikes, odds, pricing, and liftoff in July were virtually unchanged after Powell's announcement. The Fed chair announced Wednesday that the central bank will start reducing bond purchases, adding that officials won't flinch from action if warranted by inflation. The U.S. dollar and treasuries advanced. There was no dramatic Hulk-like metamorphosis from the Fed last night, as they kept close to expectation, DB's Jim Reed said in a note. At 7:30 a.m. Eastern, Dow E-minis were down 7 points, or 0.02%. S&P 500 E-minis were up 6.75 points, or 0.15%, having earlier tagged a record high 4662.5. And NASDAQ 100 E-minis were up 61.25 points, or 0.39%. The U.S. dollar and treasuries advanced. Of course, here we see the graphic. It says the S&P 500 and NASDAQ notched record all-time closes for their fifth straight sessions on Wednesday, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average posted a record close for the fourth session in a row. A cheery third-quarter earnings season, coupled with upbeat commentary about future growth from corporate America, has helped Wall Street largely dismiss concerns about rising prices, supply chain snags, and a mixed macroeconomic picture. A widely expected move by the Fed on announcing its plan to start tapering its monthly bond purchases beginning this month, while sticking to the belief about the transitory nature of inflation and waiting for more job growth before raising interest rates, also helped sentiment. Fed policymakers announced a stimulus tapering plan as expected, but expressed no hurry to raise benchmark rates even though inflation may run hot for months. While that supported risk-taking in stock markets, a second-day reality check appeared to have emerged in the bond and currency markets. A tug-of-war looked set to continue between dovish central banks and markets pricing in quicker than expected rate hikes. So, flashing forward, some of the big movers today, we got Qualcomm gains 8% pre-market as results at the chip giant showed a robust performance against a backdrop of supply constraints, while strength in Android headsets is underpinning growth. Bookings gained 3.7% in post-market trading Wednesday after the company reported gross bookings that beat analyst forecast as an increase in COVID-19 vaccination rates helped spur a rebound. Roku falls 7% in pre-market after third quarter results that missed expectations on key metrics for the maker of streaming equipment. Upland Software slumps 22% in pre-market after results, with Jefferies downgrading the stock as it's the third quarter in a row the firm has not delivered a beat on the top line. Skills drops as much as 13% in pre-market after the mobile games platform operator reported a net loss for the third quarter. TDH surges as much as 173% in U.S. pre-market trading after the pet food firm and meme trader Favorite announced a placement. Magnite falls 10% in pre-market after the advertising solutions firm reported adjusted revenue for the third quarter that lagged behind the average analyst estimate. Corvo falls 7% in pre-market trading after a sales forecast for the communication system maker that fell short of the average analyst estimate. Fastly jumped 11% pre-market after the infrastructure software maker reported quarterly revenue that surpassed the average analyst estimate after misses in the past 2 quarters. Quinn Street climbs 21% pre-market as the online marketing company raises its full-year outlook. Flashing forward into the old snapshot here, S&P 500 futures were up 0.1% to 4659.5. Stocks Europe 600 up 0.5% to 483.53. Nikkei up 0.9% to 29794.37. Shanghai Composite was up 0.8%, 3526.87. Euro down 0.5% to 1.1551. Brent futures up 0.8% to 82.57 a barrel. Gold spot up 0.3% to 1776.28 per ounce. U.S. dollar index up 0.37% to 94 and change. Some other overnight news out of Bloomberg. The Bank of England will decide Thursday whether to deliver its first interest rate hike since the pandemic, as a divided monetary policy committee grapples with spiking inflation and slowing growth. The U.S. is asking OPEC Plus to increase output by as much as 800,000 barrels a day, said delegates and diplomats, but the organization is expected to stick to its planned gradual increase, according to Bloomberg survey. Investors are hoping the Federal Reserve can manage the path toward rate hikes as smoothly as its taper announcement, according to strategists, who are cautiously optimistic the coming months will see moderate advances for yields, the dollar, and equities. Friday's labor report is seen as the next flashpoint for markets, given rates traders remain relatively aggressive about the need for Chair Jerome Powell to avoid being overly patient about hiking borrowing costs. The Bank of Japan Governor Hirohiko Kuroda and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida helped further shore up the nation's commitment to its 2% inflation goal and tamp down any lingering speculation of a rethink of the target or tapering plans. Having abandoned its experimental bond yield target 2 days ago, the Reserve Bank of Australia is now left with the trusty old tools of policy making, facing traders who still reckon it's behind the curve. Some more out of news squawk here. Back over to Asia. Says, from pianos to paint, the chip crunch is hurting Japan earnings. Toyota's swelling profits belie global auto part shortages. EU lawmakers call for high-level Taiwan ties, defies China. And Shimayo halts retail investors' bids for local bonds after plunge. And back over to Europe. Says, Brookfield enters German real estate fray with bid for Austria. Credit Suisse flags loss next quarter to cap year to forget. Novartis unwinds Roche ties with $20.7 billion stake sale. And Aston Martin counts on 3 million Valkyrie as SUV drives rebound. And on the docket here today, pretty skinny day, all at 8:30 a.m. this morning on the events calendar. October initial jobless claims estimate of 275,000. Prior print was a 281. Continuing claims estimate of 2.15 million versus the prior 2.24 million. Also at 8:30, third quarter unit labor costs estimate of 7%, prior was a 1.3. Non-farm productivity estimate down 3.1% versus a prior up 2.1%. September trade balance estimate down 80.2 billion versus down 73.3 billion. So that's a quick read through on what's going on in the old market here this morning. On the docket here today, before bell, Moderna announcing their financials, Viacom, CBS, Barrick, Nikola, to name a few. And then, of course, we got a few after the close here today, Square, Pinterest, Uber, Airbnb, things of that nature. So some things in that we'll certainly keep an eye on. So outside of that, talking about shipping still. FreightWaves had this yesterday, says 58,900 containers are now paying a rising $100 penalty in LA Long Beach. We've talked about this in the past, that now, yes, all these freight forwarders, importers, what have you, are going to be spending a little extra change on all these containers laying around, and it's going to increase day by day. Says the penalties on 58,900 containers at the ports of LA and Long Beach are officially racking up charges. These containers were part of the 60,000 containers the ports alerted the ocean carriers last Monday to move or face a daily $100 penalty per container, increasing in $100 increments per day. American Shipper reached out to both ports for updates on the removal of the lingering containers. According to the Port of LA Executive Director Gene Soroka, there are a total of 84,000 total imports on docks waiting to be transported, a total that is 3,000 higher than a week ago. Of those 84,000, a whopping 40,000 of those containers have been at the Port of LA for 9+ days, which is considered lingering. Containers are considered long-dwelling if the boxes are waiting over 9 days for truck, 6 days for rail. This is the wrong direction, said Soroka. The Port of Long Beach saw 10% of its 27,000 lingering containers move out since last Wednesday. The port has approximately 18,900 containers being charged penalties. This is a sign that the surcharge is having its intended effect, but clearly there is more work to do, said Noel Hasagaba, COO of the Port of Long Beach. The ocean carriers are stepping up and coordinating with the shippers, terminals, railroads, and motor carriers to look for the fastest way to push inbound containers out of the terminals. The 58,900 late containers at these ports represent a much-needed economic injection for the U.S. economy, a handsome $2,585,651,100 in trade, based on a per-import 20-foot equivalent unit value of $43,899, the average of containerized import TEUs at the Port of LA in 2020. The Harbor Trucking Association tells American Shipper it continues to face the same issues with the terminals. Our hurdle has been and continues to be empty container returns, said Matt Schrapp, CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association. While there has been movement on a limited number of sweeper vessels beginning to call to the port complex, we need consistent and continuous empty sweeper dispatch in order to free up space on dock and in our yards. Duration of trucks at the terminals at the Port of LA and Long Beach show slow-moving trade this past Saturday. And if you recall, I think they said that they were supposed to have this stuff removed by October 31st. Obviously, that did not happen. And so now they are paying the penalty. And of course, we also talked about the fact they just had a powwow last week, and a lot of gripes in that with us, certainly. Halloween was more trick than treat. This is Saturday truck turn times, Port of LA, Long Beach, obviously taking longer than intended. This out of Geostamp, and then, of course, Sunday truck turn times as well. So it says Weston LaBar, head of strategy for Long Beach-based logistics company Cargomatic, tells American Shipper his team continues to see an increase in the volume of containers moved every week. Says for us, the major issues are not about moving imports, but rather continue to be around empty return restrictions that can feed to capacity constraints around chassis and yard storage, explained LaBar. What the focus of the ports and public sector needs to be on is empty container storage and returns. The fee won't solve any issues of port congestion without solving for the underlying contributing factors around empty containers. So I think we'll break from that there. I think we get the idea that at the end of the day, yes, probably not enough trucks, probably not enough chassis, etc., etc. And of course, this is going to have a knock on effect because at the end of the day, regulations also have played into this, as well as a number of other factors. So, that being said, let's jump over to what's going on in the workforce related area. Over 10,000 John Deere workers reject latest offer as strike extends into the third week. It says over 10,000 striking John Deere workers across 12 facilities have rejected a contract offer, which would have included an immediate 10% pay raise and an $8,500 ratification bonus per worker, according to AP. The rejected raises were twice as much as an earlier offer, which was declined by the United Auto Workers Union members last month, sending the strike, which began October 14th, into its third week. Our members at John Deere strike for the ability to earn a decent living, retire with dignity, and establish fair work rules. Chuck Browning, the director of the United Automobile Workers Union's Ag Department, said in a statement when the strike began, adding, we stay committed to bargaining until our members' goals are achieved. According to the UAW, the new offer was rejected by 55 to 45%, a slimmer margin than the October vote. The strike against John Deere and Company will continue as we discuss next steps with the company, the union said. Deere Chief Administration Officer Mark Howes pitched the latest offer as a $3.5 billion investment in John Deere employees, and therefore their communities to significantly enhance wages and benefits are already the best and most comprehensive in our industries. The rejected agreement would have included a 10% pay raise this year and 5% increase in the third and fifth years of the deal. In the second, fourth, and sixth years, employees would have received lump sum payments equal to 3% of their annual pay, as well as a ratification bonus of $8,500. Even though it would have created greater competitive challenges within our industries, we had faith in our employees' ability to sharpen our competitive edge, wrote Howes. Shares in Deere were off sharply on the news. Says power to the people. The Deere strike is just the latest example of who's really got leverage right now as scamdemic benefits end across 26 states, as Bloomberg noted last week. American workers, the ones involuntarily benched during the scamdemic, and the ones who labored through it at great risk so others could stay fed or entertained or alive, are now doing their best to be impossible to ignore. Private sector union members are authorizing strikes at a rate rarely seen in modern America, with more than 100,000 workers recently threatening or mounting work stoppages in healthcare, higher education, telecommunications, transportation, television, mining, manufacturing, music, metals, oils, carpentry, whiskey, and cereal. The internet dubbed October Striketober. Non-union workers are voting with their feet as well, fueling a labor market reckoning that's become known as the Great Resignation. On October 12th, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that an unprecedented 2.9% of the entire workforce, some 4.3 million people, quit their jobs in the month of August, even as the government was confirming it would nuke extra jobless benefits in hopes of forcing people to work. The environment is reminiscent of 1945, a period in U.S. history rife with massive strikes by what are now known as essential workers, where 10% of the workforce was on strike at one point or another. In response, median pay rose significantly along with productivity. And of course, here we see global unemployment benefits, where we stack up relative to many other countries. Iceland leading the way, Denmark, France, Italy, mostly European countries at the top there. And this is global unemployment benefits, maximum months of unemployment insurance for 2019 figures, according to the Economic Policy Institute. Says so far, workers haven't won much just yet. However, hashtag Striketober and the Great Resignation has attracted the attention of Congress, according to Judy Conte, Director of Government Affairs at the National Employment Law Project. Some members of Congress are absolutely paying attention, and they understand that there's a different level of worker engagement than ever before, she says. Without COVID supplements, U.S. unemployment insurance is meager compared with benefits in peer countries, delivering beneficiaries roughly 40% of their prior income on average. Too little to stave off a crisis for those most in need. It also excludes millions of people, including many temps, part time, gig workers classified as contractors, undocumented immigrants, and people who quit their jobs because of domestic violence or child care needs. Also, the present system doesn't require employers to tell workers such a benefit exists, according to Bloomberg. Needless to say, whatever dear employees finally end up with will set the tone for strike negotiations across the country. And so I just find it very interesting, the timing of all this. I don't know if maybe you guys see this as well, but I find it rather interesting that all these strikes just interestingly started all around the same time. All these unions just almost acted in concert, if you will, especially as these mandates and things of that nature start to roll out, and fully knowing that many folks probably are not going to abide in said mandates. It's almost like the unions have tried to co opt a movement here as if to snow the populace over as to what is really going on in the workforce, right? And of course, we talked a little bit about this yesterday. If you're with us on the 5x5 channel, talked a little bit about what happened yesterday with the walkouts and that across 50 some cities here in the United States. More to come next week as well. And again, it's just the timing of it is rather impeccable. So, aside from that, yesterday, as we talked about with Federal Reserve talking about tapering, the FOMC launches a $15 billion taper, reiterates inflation transitory, no rate hike discussion. Says since the last FOMC statement and press conference on September 22nd, when the T word was first uttered with malice, stocks have soared higher, bonds are ugly, and gold and dollar are barely changed. And that we see according to the graphic here. But, in what Peter Thiel calls the most honest market we have, Bitcoin has soared to new record highs since the last Fed statement. And yes, it's rallied to above about 66,600 bucks, I think, at its peak there. And of course, it's kind of currently sitting around 62, 63,000 per Bitcoin. Says as the market has ripped extremely hawkishly, implying more than 2 rate hikes by the end of next year, and pulling forward the first rate hike expectations to June. There we see the implied number of rate hikes. Dramatically more hawkish than the Fed's dot plot would suggest. Says, but the market is also beginning to price in a policy error, which can be seen in the chart above also, as the yield curve has collapsed since the last Fed statement. And they're looking at the Treasuries 5x30s and the spread. Says, which is something many are watching to see if Powell jawbones that down while tapering today during a bullish reason for buying more stonks after all. The trajectory of the taper is widely expected to be as follows: $15 billion per month, split 5 to 10 between mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. So yes, this depicting that here starting in November. Basically shaving off 10 billion of the treasuries, 5 billion by way of mortgage-backed securities. So basically we're going from 120 billion a month, shave off 15 out of that, we're down to 105, and that will take all the way to March of next year, or May of next year rather. Says which fits the market's pricing a 70% chance of a hike by June 2022 and a 97% chance of a hike by July. And the Fed delivered with tapers starting in November at $15 billion a month. The statement says that the committee, quote, decided to begin reducing the monthly pace of its net asset purchase by $10 billion for Treasury securities and $5 billion for agency mortgage-backed securities, end quote. The pace of tapering will likely be appropriate each month, but the board is, quote, prepared to adjust the pace of purchases if warranted by changes in the economic outlook, the statement says. The Fed seems less confident in its transitory view during the statement from inflation is elevated, largely reflecting transitory factors, to inflation is elevated, largely reflecting factors that are expected to be transitory. Offering some explanation for inflation also, supply and demand imbalances related to the scamdemic and the reopening of the economy have contributed to sizable price increases in some sectors. Pretty much all of them, right? All of which suggests a more hawkish, concerned bias on inflation. So, will the aggression of dip buyers slow somewhat as the trajectory of the Fed balance sheet shows? And of course, there we see the Fed balance sheet basically mirroring the S&P 500. And now to the press conference. How many times will Powell proclaim tapering is not tightening? And I won't bother to read through this because basically it's a bunch of gibberish to me. And of course, doesn't really matter. We can see that at our various supermarkets, at our gas stations, and how much is leaving our wallets as opposed to how much is actually being saved. So, aside from that, truckers tired of taking blame for congestion crisis at California ports out of freight waves. Says as Miguel Silva surveyed his truck yard just outside the port of Oakland last week, he pointed to shipping containers filled with corn and soybean seed bound for impoverished nations in Africa and elsewhere around the globe. Silva said his customers' genetically modified seed, which can't be reused because it's engineered in a lab, should have been loaded on a cargo ship weeks ago to arrive in time for the planting season. However, appointment times can be scarce. The terminal operators' push toward automation, which Silva and other trucking company owners say isn't always reliable, requires drivers to check for appointment times day and night and on weekends to see if more time slots open up. I have customers calling me daily, telling me to name my price, that money is no object, but to please just pull the containers. Silva, president of Intermodal Logistics at the Port of Oakland, told FreightWaves, I wish it was that simple. So driver shortage? Question mark? Silver and other trucking companies dispute the widely reported message that a driver shortage is largely to blame for the port congestion issues in California. During a 5-day trip to the major ports in California, FreightWaves interviewed multiple company executives who said they were actually shedding drivers because of the lack of consistent work due to port congestion bottlenecks, equipment, and efficiency issues. Port truckers told FreightWaves on Monday that the Oakland International Container Terminal website had been down since the previous day, so trucking companies weren't able to obtain the vessel export receiving list. OICT, the port's largest stevedoring terminal, is owned by SSA International. Susan Ransom, client services manager for SSA, confirmed that the OICT website was down early Monday, but said it was still operating the gate. They expect us to fly blind into their terminal, Bill Abudi, owner of AB Truck in Oakland, told FreightWaves. He pays his drivers hourly to sit in line at the 3 remaining terminals at the Port of Oakland. Abudi said his drivers sometimes wait 4 to 6 hours to maybe pull 1 container per truck each day. Prior to the congestion crisis, his drivers averaged 3 to 4 turns each day. So automation isn't always the answer. Well, as terminal operators pushed for automation to reduce human interaction, a glitch in the system rendered crane operators and truck drivers unable to move without further instruction, Abudi said. It's the terminal operators that are not managing the workforce properly and don't realize that they had a problem with a computer system until it's too late, Abudi told FreightWaves. It's often the longshoremen and the truck drivers that pay the price and are forced to sit because of the terminal operators' mistakes. The president of a Southern California drayage company said he's had to shed 2 owner-operators and a company driver from his payroll in the past 2 weeks in an effort to keep his business afloat. What's so frustrating is that we have plenty of work, we have the volume and the customers, but the ports are not allocating or making that work available to my drivers on a consistent basis. The company executive, who said he didn't want to be identified for fear of retaliation by terminal operators, told FreightWaves. Prior to the scamdemic, the executive said he had 8 drivers. He ramped up operations to include 18 drivers to handle the e-commerce boom as consumers' spending habits changed from shopping at brick-and-mortar stores to online. He said nearly all of his drivers are paid hourly and receive health care benefits and other incentives, while a few of his owner-operators prefer to be paid per trip. Those drivers are struggling to make ends meet, he said, as he pays $150 a day for a dry run, meaning the owner-operator is sent to the port complex to wait in line but return without a container. If the ports were efficient in releasing my 200 containers per week, I wouldn't have to let anybody go, but the ports are only making roughly 130 to 140 of my containers available per week. So I'm overbuilt, and it's been going on for a few months now with no end in sight, the drayage company president told FreightWaves. While he and other drayage companies expanded operations to accommodate increased e-commerce, the ports and terminal operators in California did not develop a long-term infrastructure plan to handle the massive container volume surge. Warehouses are also at capacity in California, he said. I thought that this was going to be a financial windfall, but it's really not turning out to be that way because of the lack of equipment and all of their restrictions. The terminal operators are, in essence, robbing me of my true potential revenue, he said. But at this point, now the terminal operators need to really expand their footprint to handle all of this volume. So, bottom line, the efficiency is not there. It appears that throughput is not optimized, as it were. And rather than, the jawboning and that we heard somebody like Biden come through and say, well, we're going to turn this into 24/7 operations. Well, it can't be done if there are bottlenecks elsewhere in the system. And of course, as we know, and I've talked about LA and Long Beach, that's 40% of all containers net coming through those 2 ports alone. Maybe it's time to look toward other ports and diversify. I heard that perhaps somebody like DeSantis may be looking to reel in some of these containers and help ease the burden, as it were. So, aside from that, get ready for food rationing. Interesting piece out of Jeffrey Tucker over at the dailyreckoning.com. Says it was a very strange moment when this week the spokesperson for the president defended inflation as a high-class problem. She explained that higher prices are merely a sign that economic activity is picking up. People are buying things, and that's good. Of course, that pushes up prices, she said. Just deal with it. At this point, the White House will say anything. Truth, facts, morality, these things matter less and less in current day America. Your misery is an illusion. Losing your job because you don't want the jab? Hey, that is the price you pay for non-compliance. Expect no sympathy from anyone in charge. The Great Rationing. It must have been this flippant dismissal that caused me to go over the top. I wrote that hyperinflation could lead not only to implicit price controls, but also to rationing. Eventually, we could see the government issuing food tickets into bank accounts that allow us only a certain amount of food for the week. 1 chicken, 1 pound of hamburger, heat, 5 rolls of toilet paper. I wrote that with a worry that it might be going too far here with speculation. This is America, after all, and we don't do things this way. And yet, in the old America, we didn't close churches for Easter or skip Christmas for a virus, and so on. Yet we know now that in fact we do these things, and easily. Fear makes anything possible. And so, right on cue, things are moving very fast these days. The Washington Compost has published an article by one of its regular contributors, from Michelle Maynard, with one message: get used to it. She says that we have come to expect too much for the economy. Ever since 1911, she says, we've been obsessed with getting stuff and getting it fast. That's dumb, she says. Deprivation is not only the new normal, it's the way things should be. Across the country, Americans' expectations of speedy service and easy access to consumer products have been crushed like a styrofoam container in a trash compactor, she writes. Time for some new, more realistic expectations. For example, she writes of the candy shortage, the milk shortage, the everything shortage. Then she concludes, rather than living constantly on the verge of throwing a fit and risking taking it out on overwhelmed servers, struggling shop owners, or late arriving delivery people, we do ourselves a favor by consciously lowering expectations. How bad can it get? She saves the best for the very end. American consumers might have been spoiled, but generations of them have also dealt with shortages of some kind. Gasoline in the 1970s, food rationing in the 1940s, housing in the 1920s, when cities such as Detroit were booming. Now it's our turn to make adjustments. You might read that again. She is defending gas lines. More astonishingly, she is going on about the glorious suffering of wartime, when food was rationed with rationing tickets. You cannot make this stuff up. What's worse, the Washington Compost published it reveals something about what they imagine could be our future. And by future, I don't mean distant future, I mean next year. No one is safe. You will notice the growing tribalization of everything and everyone in the last 20 months. People are retreating to what is safe and known, their own kind, their neighborhood, their closest friends, their families. Even those are strained, but that is all we have. The old world of integration and heterogeneity is shattered. Commercial culture is dead in large parts of the country, and fear and depression are taking over as the dominant emotions. I write that, and my friends in Texas, Florida, and South Dakota say, I have no idea what you are talking about. Life around here is normal. Concerts are packed. Restaurants are busy. No one is wearing masks. We are so over this. I'm happy for them, truly. But there's a problem. Many problems. We all share the same monetary unit. Supply chains are connected all over the country and the world. Every state relies on goods from every other state. We are long past autarky. We can feel like we are safe, but we are not. Hyperinflation will affect everyone without exception. If North Carolina can't get milk and chicken, neither can Florida and New Mexico. The deprivation will be shared. A good example is the car shortage. Texas was not spared simply because the state has a relatively halfway decent governor who finally got wise, too late, but he finally got there. Still, the car lots are empty. It's the same with many things. We all use the same dollar. Its destruction will hit South Dakota the same as it hits California. There will be no safe space. Many people moved to get away from despotism during this last year. They thought they were safe. They are not. Life for now is better in Miami than Chicago, but when the crisis hits, it will not spare red states with reasonable governors just because the people there have not been part of the insanity for a long time. They will still pay the price. So the Great Deprivation? In the past, when things went wrong, at least our leaders admitted that things were not going so well. They tried to fix the problem. It's not clear that our current leadership, quote unquote, in Washington even believes it is a problem. The response toward existing inflation is telling. They think it's all fine. Gas lines? Fine. Just switch to electric. No heating oil, or it's unaffordable? That's all the better for solving climate change. No bags in the stores? Just bring your own. No meat? eat veggie burgers, and so on. These people are part of a cult. They do not oppose poverty. They think it's about time we experienced it. Poverty is good for us. Deprivation is plenty. Inflation is prosperity. Empty shelves are a reset to the way things should be. These are people for whom socialism was not a failure, but a triumph in which people learned to become a new form of community through suffering. In fact, they are pro-suffering. It's a new form of leftist ideology that has gained steam for decades. Now they are in charge. They get perverse pleasure out of the whole scene. It doesn't matter how bad it gets. Our leaders will never admit failure. They will look at the disaster they are creating and call it success. This is what is truly chilling about the unfolding crisis. They do not believe it is a crisis. They think this is a reset to the way things should work. And I thought that was a pretty good reality check, because that's exactly right. They enjoy misery and suffering. And with socialism, Marxism, totalitarianism, communism, equal suffering. That is exactly what they want in their dystopian views. And he's absolutely right. Even though many folks have fled New York, California, etc., and moved to red states, the one thing that joins us all is the currency system that we currently have. Everybody uses the same dollar bills and coinage in your pocket. However, and I spoke of this briefly yesterday, the one thing that could potentially pull us out of this, whether you choose to believe in Bitcoin or not, it is a solution, not the solution, but it has the power enough to undermine governments. And that, I think, is part of the reason why they're so extremely scared of the fact that a system like that could exist, does exist, and is gaining steam. Matter of fact, there's a headline out here. It says the Miami mayor is transitioning his whole salary into Bitcoin. And they're Bitcoining up their whole economy in Miami right now as we speak. So again, cautionary tale here. Take it for what it's worth, but definitely prepare. So aside from that, and you can't make this stuff up either. Of course, with COP26 in the background, we've talked about the energy woes net going on around the globe, from China to India to the UK, Europe, you name it. God must have a sense of humor, because we get this: as coal keeps lights on at COP26 as low wind strikes again. Yep. So these idiots, these so-called leaders, have no clue. The UK's failing renewable strategy is a national embarrassment. Critically low wind power for nearly the whole of yesterday resulted in extremely high prices, with the two remaining coal units at Drax offering to save the day at £4,000 per megawatt hour, nearly 100 times the wholesale price normal before the current crisis started, with many other fossil fuel generators also riding to the rescue at staggering prices. Indeed, yesterday, the 3rd November, saw a new record for the total daily cost of balancing the Great Britain electricity grid. The previous record of £38 million, 29 times the current daily average, was smashed by a margin of £6 million, with the new record standing at £44.7 million. The causes are easy to identify from the Balancing Mechanism Reporting Service's own chart of the transmission system fuel mix. Wind power, the dark blue bars, was extremely low for most of the day, with a minimum of only 1 gigawatt, under 5% of its capacity. And I presume they mean that little dark blue blip down here. Yeah. Wind and solar are going to save us. Well, how do you make up the rest of that gap? Minimum wind generation coincided neatly with peak demand, and as a result, system prices reached stunning levels, with a maximum of just over £4,000 a megawatt hour, nearly 100 times the wholesale price normal before the current crisis started, as can be seen in the BMRS chart. And here we see the tick up yesterday. Says these prices brought coal and gas back onto the system to save the day. But emergency measures are expensive, and the cost to consumers and the wider economy was little short of horrifying. When these remaining fossil fuel generators are no longer on the system, the cost of securing supply will rise further still. In fact, batteries and hydrogen storage on the scale required are very unlikely to be built in the time required and have severe environmental downsides that mean they may never be built at all. And even if actually built, the cost of balancing the system with these technologies will make yesterday's record look like a bargain. Grid balancing expenditures in the UK are already 10 times their pre-wind and solar levels. In the future, they will rise still further, consuming a significant fraction of national wealth. The UK climate strategy is all but entirely committed to renewables, and it isn't working. With the best will in the world, and however much they care about climate change, neither individual households nor the wider economy can stand these costs. Needless to say, such problems are in fact well understood in other parts of the world, which is why neither China nor India is following us down the wind and solar route. The costs are economically destabilizing. Fortunately, there is an alternative. Unwind the renewables failure and put the UK firmly back on an engineerable gas to nuclear strategy, as described by Dr. Capel Aris and the present author in their paper, Realism or Utopianism, a proposal for the reform of the net zero policy. So, interesting article out of Net Zero Watch here yesterday, highlighting the hypocrisy of the COP quote unquote leaders at COP26 and the fact that wind and solar are not going to save jack squat. All right. Also this morning, U.S. worker productivity plunges most in 40 years, but jobless claims back to normal. Initial jobless claims improved further last week with just 269,000 Americans filing for first-time jobless benefits. So here we are tracking down, according to the graphic out of Bloomberg. Kentucky and California saw the biggest jump in jobless claims, while Missouri and Florida saw the biggest drop. Yep, so there we see at the top to bottom there. Says it leaves the total number of Americans on some form of government dole just above 2.6 million, and the lowest since pre-pandemic lockdowns. So here we are right down here. But this good news is countered by a collapse in U.S. productivity in the third quarter. The 5% plunge is the greatest quarterly drop in productivity in 40 years. So yes, pretty staggering large red bar drop here, measuring all the way back 40 plus years. Says the productivity plunge is mirroring the surge in unit labor costs in quarter three. And here we see the uptick. Time to start hiking rates, Jay? Good question. So, aside from some financials this morning, Dan Bongino's show has dropped by Cumulus Radio. I don't know if you guys happen to catch this in recent days, but obviously, if you've paid attention to Bongino as of late, number one, he has been jabbed. However, he is anti-mandate. And apparently, the powers that be within the confab of Cumulus Radio said that everybody needs to get the jab or else, well, take a hike. And apparently that's exactly what happened because I think he was playing reruns all last week and now, whoop, gone. So when Washington Examiner says industry insiders told Trade Magazine Radio Inc. that Bongino's show will be dropped from distribution entirely this week. His live shows stopped airing last week and reruns were circulating in their place. Industry insiders told Trade Magazine Radio Inc. Yep, there we go. Bongino is vaccinated due to cancer treatment, but he took a principled stand for the unvaccinated. So there you go. Taking a stand, and of course, as we mentioned the other day when I broadcast the forum in that Senator Ron Johnson put together, inviting the heads of the CDC, FDA, NIH, all the big pharma folks, of which nobody showed up. Many of these folks are not anti-vaxxers. They're very much pro-vax, and we're still damaged. But their voices are not being heard. And so this is, I suppose, to Bongino's credit, a form of protest. And of course, obviously, this is going to have a negative effect on his distribution of his radio show. And, he's going to have to join the rest of us, I suppose, and find alternative means to reach his audiences, right? So, aside from that, continuing a story that came out yesterday by way of some impeccable races across the country. Breitbart had this as exclusive. Truck driver Edward Durr, how I took out New Jersey's top Democratic boss. So apparently this guy did indeed win. Truck driver Edward Durr, who stunned the political world this week by apparently defeating New Jersey State Senate President Steve Sweeney, told Breitbart News on Wednesday that he won because voters were tired of the government messing with people's families. With all precincts reporting Wednesday, Durr led Sweeney, the state's Dem political boss, by over 2,000 votes. Though the result has yet to be confirmed, Durr is likely to be certified as the victor in State Senate District 3. It says, and he offered Breitbart News an interesting analysis of why he won, and why Republicans did so well statewide. The main issue was rights, Durr said via phone. People talk about how New Jersey has the highest taxes, and we are the worst state for business, with high debt and so on. But bottom line is rights. It's family. When somebody's messing with your family, you'll do anything, he said. The governor was messing with people's families. When you mess with somebody's job, their livelihood, their home, their children, people just won't take that. Durr said that New Jersey's harsh coronavirus policies had helped create a perfect storm that made his victory possible. It was a combination of a governor who acts like a king and a Senate president who acts like a court jester and does nothing. That made it very easy to convince people they were not being paid attention to. And when they got ignored, they got angry. But Durr, 58, did more than just get lucky, and he spent more than $153 that has been highlighted in media reports. That's the amount I spent prior to the primary, he explained, somewhat exasperated by the inaccurate reporting. He estimates that he spent around $8 to $9 grand in total, mostly on campaign literature, yard signs, and a now viral video. So let's let this play through.
Hello, my name is Edward Durr. I'm running for New Jersey State Senate. I've lived here all my life, raising my 3 kids. In 2020, my opponent sat by and watched as Governor Murphy forced nursing homes to take in COVID-19 patients, resulting in the death of over 8,000 of our seniors. He remained silent as Governor Murphy, with his lockdown and mandates, forced the closing of over 1/3 of our small businesses, costing New Jersey families thousands of jobs. He has done nothing, as 7 out of every 10 moves are leaving the state, placing a heavier burden on those of us who remain. The Senate President has spent 20 years in Trenton. Higher taxes, increasing debt, and a rising cost of living. We deserve better. New Jersey, it's time for a change. So together, let's end single-party rule. Vote for me, Edward Durr, for Senate.
So there you have it. Apparently that was his campaign video. Nice finishing touch, hopping on the old Harley and riding away. The only thing that I might have changed is probably do a burnout and leave some smoke in the video, but hey, that's just me. Says he also worked hard making door-to-door to speak to voters. Having left long-haul trucking for a job working as a local route close to home, he was able to use afternoons and evenings to campaign in the district, together with several volunteers. I walked 3 to 4 hours on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, Saturdays and Sundays. I walked 6 to 8 hours. We usually had a half dozen volunteers. One time we went out and we had 12 to 13 go out with us, he recalled proudly. Trust me, plenty days I did not feel like walking. It was too hot. My ankles and my feet hurt. I'm not a young man anymore, and I have gout and plantar fasciitis, and it was a hard thing. But it was well worth it because it allowed me the opportunity to talk to every person I could possibly talk to and understand what they were feeling, and got the pulse. During one walk, he encountered his opponent. Durr challenged him to a debate, but Sweeney blew me off. He laughed at me. Durr also campaigned through personal tragedy. He lost his father, Ed Sr., just last week. He has 3 children from a previous marriage, Heather, Eddie, and Melissa. He remarried in 2018, and his wife, Lynn, supported his efforts on the campaign trail. And it says, Durr is a fan of conservative media. I watched a lot of Greg Gutfeld, Newsmax, and One America, he said. He listens to Dan Bongino and Steven Crowder. Though he has soured on Fox News since the 2020 election, he watches Mark Levin's Life, Liberty, and Levin on Sunday evenings. Asked whether his life will change, Durr said, "It's already changed now. Everybody knows my name." He reflected, then added, "Am I going to change? No, I'm always going to be me, the blue-collar guy. I never once worried what somebody said about me. I'll always be who I am. My parents were great parents. One thing I can guarantee, you're getting a person who's going to fight for you, who lives to get into the fight." As to what his first fight will be about, Durr offered a surprising answer: special needs children. A fellow candidate, he recalled, had a Down syndrome child who, like other children, had to spend a year at home instead of at school. But when schools reopened, the child had aged out of his special needs program after having lost a crucial year. That issue could have been addressed before the pandemic, Durr said. There should not be an age out time. He also spoke about helping those whose businesses were destroyed by the government's pandemic policies, such as the rent moratorium. How many of these landlords are just moms and dads supplementing their Social Security income? He asked. This is wrong. You're telling these people they have to go broke because you have to be Mr. King? He added, referring to Governor Phil Murphy, who was only narrowly re-elected after a strong challenge from Republican Jack Ciattarelli. The result is not official yet, but Durr is patient, believing that his victory will be confirmed, even if he has to wait until the votes are certified on November 18th. And how does he feel? A regular guy who may have just taken out one of the most powerful political bosses in New Jersey? "I'm feeling really good," he said. So, a little bit of a happy, feel-good story as a result of what played out here just a couple days ago now. And hopefully we see a lot more of that in coming elections. And of course, hopefully you get folks like him aboard looking for election integrity heading into 2022 as well. And let's not forget, too, that this whole Jack Ciattarelli and Murphy business probably is not over, as it appears there have been some shenanigans at play. All right. So aside from that, these 9 Republican senators failed to sign on for a formal challenge to Biden's OSHA vaccine mandate. And I'll just quick highlight these folks at this point. Let's see. OSHA, obviously, at this point is still working on their final regs, so there is technically nothing on the books at this point in time other than just the press release. No executive order, no nothing. The Republican aide told Fox News that the remaining 9 GOP senators, Mitch McConnell, Richard Shelby, Susan Collins, Roy Blunt, Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, Bill Cassidy, Tim Scott, and Rob Portman, are awaiting the formal filing of the OSHA rule. The aide said that there is no Republican opposition to the disapproval. So, bottom line, still waiting on all of the Republicans on the Senate side to get aboard. And it's to be determined as to what exactly is going to come of that. But bottom line, why are they waiting until OSHA does their thing? You know, law is supposed to come out of Congress, not some bureaucrats and that underneath the executive side of things. So last but not least, I'll quick highlight this as well. Interesting piece. Zero Hedge picked up the article late yesterday, but I'll jump right over to the U.S. Department of Commerce. The Commerce adds NSO Group and other foreign companies to entity list for malicious cyber activities. So in effect, this marks the first time that the U.S. has sanctioned somebody out of Israel. First, the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, has released a final rule adding 4 foreign companies to the entity list for engaging in activities that are contrary to the national security or foreign policy interests of the United States. The 4 entities are located in Israel, Russia, and Singapore. NSO Group and Kandiru out of Israel were added to the entity list based on evidence that these entities developed and supplied spyware to foreign governments that use these tools to maliciously target government officials, journalists, business people, activists, academics, and embassy workers. These tools have also enabled foreign governments to conduct transnational repression, which is the practice of authoritarian governments targeting dissidents, journalists, and activists outside of their sovereign borders to silence dissent. Such practices threaten the rules-based international order. Positive Technologies out of Russia and Computer Security Initiative Consultancy, PTE, Limited, out of Singapore, were added to the entity list based on a determination that they traffic in cyber tools used to gain unauthorized access to information systems, threatening the privacy and security of individuals and organizations worldwide. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina M. Raimondo released the following statement. The United States committed to aggressively using export controls to hold companies accountable that develop, traffic, or use technologies to conduct malicious activities that threaten the cybersecurity of members of civil society, dissidents, government officials, and organizations here and abroad. The End User Review Committee, which is chaired by the Department of Commerce and includes the Departments of Defense, State, Energy, and where appropriate, Treasury, determined that the conduct of these 4 entities raises sufficient concerns to place them on the entity list pursuant to Section 744.11b of the Export Administration Regulations, EAR. The entity list is a tool touted by BAS to restrict the export, re-export, and in-country transfer of items subject to the EAR to persons, individuals, organizations, companies reasonably believed to be involved, have been involved, or pose a significant risk of being or becoming involved in activities contrary to the national security or foreign policy interests of the United States. For the 4 entities added to the entity list in this final rule, BIS imposes a license requirement that applies to all items subject to the EAR. In addition, no license exceptions are available for exports, re-exports, or transfers to the entities being added to the entity list in this rule. BIS imposes a license review policy of a presumption of denial for these entities. Today's action is a part of the Biden-Harris administration's efforts to put human rights at the centers of U.S. foreign policy, including by working to stem the proliferation of digital tools used for repression. This effort is aimed at improving citizens' digital security, combating cyber threats, and mitigating unlawful surveillance, and follows a recent interim final rule released by the Commerce Department establishing controls on the export, re-export, or in-country transfer of certain items that can be used for malicious cyber activities. And of course, the Zero Hedge article also pulled this in, suspected Pegasus infections. So obviously, this is exactly what they're targeting here. And of course, I find the timing of this very interesting. Cyber Polygon. You know, the next little exercise net that the World Economic Forum would absolutely love to deploy, just kind of like they did with the whole scamdemic, right? So I find it rather interesting the timing that the Commerce Department comes out, not only sanctions Israel, Russia, Singapore, etc., but of course we've got Cyber Polygon in the background, laying in wait. Yet another exercise that may just happen to go live. So nonetheless, something to keep an eye on, as if we don't have enough to watch. But that's going to do it for the broadcast here this morning. A little bit of a lengthy one, but appreciate you guys tuning in as always. And we will see you back on the next one. Take care. God bless, everybody.